Stop thinking about your testimony as the things you know, and start thinking about your testimony in terms of the things that you know so well and that you've paid a price to know, that if you didn't stand up and speak, that you would be held accountable before God someday.
How do Latter-day Saints get to that point?
For Latter-day Saints to bear testimony and to become good advocates for the faith and to be missionaries, they need to focus on not just the true, but also the good and the beautiful.
The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is a high-demand religion and has been classified as a high-demand religion.
If my nuanced friend gets to live authentically, don't I get to as well?
The most important worldview that we have is the redemptive gospel worldview.
The things that you're not willing to defend today become the things you stop believing tomorrow.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Sword and Spirit. My name is Daniel Sorensen. I'm your host today. And today we're joined by a special guest where we're going to talk about a really important topic. And today's guest is Benjamin Pacini. Ben, how are you doing today?
Life is good, my friend. Life is very good. I love getting, first of all, kudos on your podcast. I think only the most noble among us know what it's like to start a podcast and do all the production values ourselves. So keep it up, man. That's a good project.
Awesome. Well, thank you. But today, like I said, we're joined by Benjamin Pacini, and today we're actually going to be talking a little bit about a presentation that he gave recently or a few times at BYU-Idaho. But before we jump into that topic, Ben, if you could just introduce yourself, kind of your upbringing in the gospel, what you do as your profession, why you're into like cultural apologetics, things like that. Just before we dive in, if you could just introduce yourself a little bit more.
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to. So my name is Ben Pacini, and I'm a professor of education at BYU-Idaho. I should say they are very kind and let me go on all the podcasts, but I very much do not represent them in any way. I started out actually as an econ undergrad, love economics. And it was the first time that I think I realized that my professor put it really bluntly. He said, there's a choice we get to make between prosperity and poverty. And I wanted to know what made prosperity. So I studied econ, had a blast, figured out that there's, policy makes a difference. And then the next thing that I did was I went and joined Teach for America, and I taught in Baltimore City for 6 years. Changed my life, was really hard, but absolutely loved it. Became an administrator in DC for 4 years, and I've been out here at BYU-Idaho for going on 6 years now, and it's been so good. It has been such a blast. To answer your question about where I come from in terms of the gospel, when I was 13, I remember my dad came home and he said, we're going on vacation. I said, oh, cool. Where are we going? He said, Rome, Italy. And I was like, what? That's so cool. When do we leave? June 1st. When do we get back? June 1st, 3 years from now. And I remember my jaw dropped. So he'd been called as a mission president. And, all of a sudden, this idea of getting a testimony for myself became very real. And I probably actually became too anxious about it. I remember asking some family members about how did you get your testimony? What was it like? How do I know when I have one? And a couple of them were like, you weirdo, go have a hobby. You're 13. Normal people don't think about this. And I was like, I have to know everything, right? Very, very serious about it. I won't tell you about my resolution to that. That may be for another time. But short answer is to say, I worked really hard and I thought really, really deeply. And I came to realize not only did I have a testimony, but it was one that I treasured and I felt was worth defending. And that's actually what leads me to cultural apologetics. So when I came to BYU-Idaho, I have heroes. I've got, Dan Peterson, Jack Welch. I've got, I grew up reading. I remember I gave my 9th grade English teacher in Rome. I started telling her about chiasmus in the Book of Mormon. And she was like, that's really interesting. And I thought she was serious. I didn't realize she was being nice. And so I went home, got Jack Welch's book, photocopied the relevant section. I was like, isn't this awesome? Ancient Hebrew poetry in the Book of Mormon. I don't think I've ever seen somebody look more like a deer in headlights than in that moment. And she was very kind. She was like, so cool, pat, pat, pat. And so I've just always been super nerdy. I come to BYU-Idaho and I'm like, oh no. What?
Sweet. That was a great introduction. I love that. I think it's also very important to know that when people, if you're a Latter-day Saint and you have a passion for defending the gospel, go for it. Take the time to study the variety of different topics that it takes to defend the gospel and proclaim the gospel. Other than not just reading your script, not just reading your scriptures and praying. There's so much more to do if you're going to truly defend the gospel from a good point of view, or from a viewpoint that is faithful, but also intellectual too. And so I love that. I think that's a great introduction. But we'll go ahead and just dive straight into your presentation. I'll chime in here and there if I have a question I want to ask. But other than that, let's just have you start diving into your presentation on cultural apologetics, why it's important, and I'll just give you the reins. The floor is now yours.
All right, awesome. Well, I want to start with this idea that I mentioned a minute ago, which is that I believe there are certain things worth defending. I think the gospel is one of them. But let me give you a few other examples. And this is going to make me sound like the most boomer, 90-year-old Republican in the world. And I just want to be clear that you probably don't know my politics based on what I'm about to say. But I think that this is really important. And I want to stress this. Jordan Peterson has said this a couple of times. I really like the way that he frames it. He kind of says there's the left and there's the right, but then there's the spirit of the left and the spirit of the right. And I really like that framing of the spirit of the right is to hold on to the good things that we have. And the spirit of the left is to get rid of the bad things that we have. It's to question and to interrogate and to say, hey, maybe there's a better system out there. And the spirit of the right is to say, maybe we do have something unique and beautiful and incredible that we should hold on to. And so when Jordan Peterson said that, like a few things clicked in my mind really quickly. And I was like, this is important to me. And one of the things that really clicked was, for a very long time, when I was in college, I was like, free markets, they're amazing. I was studying econ at BYU, and it was awesome, right? And I was like, free markets are amazing, they're incredible. And I go to the East Coast for 10 years, and I start doing this thing without intending to, because I'm trying to be a good Latter-day Saint. I'm trying to be humble and kind, where I will listen to other people and accept their views. And I think there's a lot of good in that. That's part of peacemaking. But I would start to soft pedal my convictions because I didn't want to offend. And I found that, like, in a very insidious way, I don't think I ever realized when it happened, but I started feeling like it's fine to have convictions as long as they're appropriately muzzled and they need to stay in the back room. And I don't think that's good. I actually don't. I think there comes a point where that is dishonest. And so I remember being in schools, and I'm pro school choice. No one on the East Coast is pro school choice. Like, I have yet to meet even one teacher who is like where I am on school choice. And so it got out, right? Like, people knew, and they were like, he's the weirdo. And I did not fit in most of my schools. And somebody came over and they were like, so what is your take? Do you just think, and she said this so genuinely, and it was so kind. And I still remember this. She was like, do you just think that public schools should go away? Like, they're bad and the people in them. And she was genuinely trying to understand. And I was like, that is such a caricature of my beliefs, but God bless you for asking. No, I just think that people will be better off when they have more choices. I think people will be better off when they can choose their school. And she was like, oh my gosh, I've never thought of it. And it was just the coolest moment. And I think since then I've realized there are times when I think that it is important to recognize not only, let me break two things apart. Sometimes when an idea is challenged, in fact, there's very good psychology evidence on this. I teach the ed psych class on campus, and I just talked about in my class cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is when you hold one idea and you're doing something that's contrary to that idea. I like to think about it as two different ideas in your head at the same time. And the key idea is not that it's a thing. The key idea is that it's almost physically painful, right? If you know smoking is bad for you and you're smoking, that's not a comfortable life to live, right? There's an incongruity there that will mess with you until you align things. And some people, I actually think cognitive dissonance can be really good for you, where you just sit and grapple with an idea. But the premise that I think is really important is I want people to understand that it is uncomfortable, that it is almost physically painful to experience this thing. As I think about what I want to defend, one of the things I'm committed to is that I'm not going to defend something on the basis that it's just uncomfortable that somebody challenged me, right? So somebody says free markets are stupid. I'm not going to go, well, your face is stupid, right? That's not a defense that is worth engaging in, because all it is the lizard brain reflex of, if they're challenging your ideas, they're challenging you, and you are in flight or fight, and you need to fight back, right? This is the 10-year-old version of, well, my house has 100 bathrooms, right? Like, this is just the dumb arguments. And so because of that, when we go into our 20s and 30s, it's very normal for us to get out into the world and to just, just to say, well, just calm down. You don't know everything. Be humble. And this is the problem, is a lot of the Christ-like attributes are very aligned with take it easy. Don't make anybody offended, right? Be calm and be kind. And it took me 10 years on the East Coast before I was finally able to be at peace with where I was, and I'll give a very simple example that was kind of a daily one. I had people say some pretty mean things about me, being a bigot or not being trustworthy around gay kids. They had no one had ever asked me what I believed about sexuality or about my doctrine, right? It literally was the jump from he's Mormon, he must believe this. And like, by the way, there are plenty of Mormons who are way more liberal on this issue than I am. And so just that on its own, it was, I can still remember, I was at like a training on diversity at my school. And I was like, I'm a little bit bugged that everyone just assumes things. And like, everybody was like, we were talking about what it's like to be gay and what it's like to be Black. And those are really important conversations. I didn't mind them. And in that same meeting, somebody said, well, and remember, there are people out in the world, and not to use you as a bad example, Ben, but there are people like Ben who have beliefs and they just made a bunch of assumptions. This is in a diversity training about how to not make assumptions about people. And I remember going, man, this is like, they really believe this. Like they're not seeing the incongruity here at all. I think it took 10 years before I was finally able to realize, like, I can be comfortable with who I am. And that in public schools, like most people just don't care. They're like, live and let live. If you're a good teacher, I don't care. And that's actually what my closest friends in teaching said was like, I really don't care about your personal beliefs if you show up for kids. And I showed up for kids. I had no hobbies. I did nothing else. I was there, and that worked really well for me. So all of this is to say, I think one of the things that I've realized is that courage is also a Christ-like attribute, that believing things is okay, that you are allowed to have strong, passionate opinions because your life is better. And here's mine. Here's the one that if I could, put on the record anywhere, it would be this. I've paid a price to know some things, and those things are sacred to me, and they have made my life materially better. I am not going to soft pedal them because that would be an offense to the things that I have learned, and it would be an offense to everything that I hold dear. It would feel similar to me like gossiping about my wife behind her back. It's that level of commitment and loyalty. Again, separating out this idea of, well, I'm in the church and people need to respect me and they won't think that none of that matters, right? It's not about reputation. It's not about cognitive dissonance. It really is about, given how much I have benefited from this, I owe it the least modicum of loyalty to defend it, to stand up for it, and to say what I actually believe, right? Not to force myself to believe, but to say that this is beautiful and worth defending. So here is my very pretty cultural apologetics slideshow. Are you seeing it really quick, just so that I can move forward on this? It. So I started on the premise that I think that there are a lot of Latter-day Saints who think that you have to have like a doctorate in philosophy. I think that's dangerous for a lot of reasons, one of which is, I think, I'm going to say something mean. I don't know how many doctorates in philosophy we need, like as a practical economic issue of like, I don't think, but also like regular Latter-day Saints should stand up for what they believe more. And if we have this weird gatekeeping vibe, then it's going to become a problem. But there's actually an underlying piece to this that I think might even be more important. And that is that I think in the church we talk, and this is, you'll forgive me for beating up on my philosophy friends. I know that you are well steeped in philosophy, and so this is very much not meant as a personal attack against you. I think that there are people who believe that you shouldn't defend anything until you are the expert in the thing. I think what that does is it erodes everything you believe at the foundational level. And what happens is the things that you're not willing to defend today become the things you stop believing tomorrow. And so whenever somebody would critique my faith or they would attack me online or whatever else, I would study and pray and think and work until I had an answer that felt satisfactory to me and that did not feel like confirmation bias, like I was just coming up with an answer. And some of them are, I don't have a good answer. Some of those questions, when people land a critique on the church that is actually really easy for me is, yeah, that's one that you should grapple with because it's tricky. It's tricky for me too, right? And that has become a lot easier to me because I don't feel this immediate knee-jerk reaction to defend every single point of the church's history or whatever else it is, because my convictions about the gospel run so much deeper. So maybe that's a good place to start. you'll see down here that I say the good, the true, and the beautiful. When we talk about testimony, we talk about it in the church as meaning a knowledge of true things. And I think that's fine. I think that's a good starting point. Knowledge is precious. I am a professor. I live in the world of knowledge. There is nothing more beautiful. And by the way, knowledge is a key ingredient in becoming a better person. And that, I think, is worth reflecting on. Having said that, one of the opening lectures that I give in my class is that it is literally only an ingredient. And I think what we've started to do is we've looked at a cake and said, cakes are yummy. I want more cake. Let me look at the ingredients for a cake and judge the cake based on the ingredients. For example, you could imagine that somebody says, I know that eggs go in cake, therefore I'm going to increase the number of eggs until I get a better cake. Now that sounds absurd and that sounds ridiculous, but I actually think it's a very, very important idea. Because I think we're doing that with testimony, where we have people that are overloading on knowledge. And they're like, if I just have enough languages under my belt, if I can speak, Koine Greek, and I can speak ancient Latin, and then eventually I will be useful to the Lord, or I will have what some people call a testimony. And I want to be clear. I'm kind of giving a mean take to my apologist friends. I think most of the friends that I have that are in apologetics feel called to that work. And a number of them have been led to study things for very, very important reasons. I want to emphasize, if you're studying Koine Greek, do it. That's great. That's awesome. I think the bigger deal for me is you can also study accounting and be an advocate for the faith. You can also study psychology. You can also study sociology. Like, all of these are fields where good members of the church can be good missionaries and good defenders of the faith, because it's about something deeper. And I'm writing an essay. I've been writing it for like 4 years now. I still haven't finished it. And it's based on Hugh Nibley wrote an article that changed my whole life. It was called Zeal Without Knowledge. And the whole premise is he's kind of making fun of the very zealous BYU graduate who goes, I know with every fiber of my being that the Book of Mormon is true. And then Hugh Nibley asks him, and have you read it? And he goes, well, no, I haven't finished yet, but I'm getting to it, which is totally a sick burn, right? And there are a lot of people that needed to hear that when I was at BYU. Here to me is the key, though. So Hugh Nibley says this, and I think it's beautiful. I think it's incredible, and that is a good critique. There are some of us who need to add to our zeal knowledge. I am also concerned that today some of us need to add to our knowledge zeal. There are professors, and I think specifically about people like me, and I'm looking in the mirror here, who have been so blessed by the truths of the gospel. But because the nature of our, what would you call it? The nature of our work is to be, dispassionate and neutral and objective, that to ever dip a toe into the area of actually arguing for a proposition feels dishonest. It feels like we're betraying our values. We simply say, yes, the gospel is a very important part of my life that I will never talk about because that would be inappropriate. And I think there's like this little short-circuiting path where all of a sudden some of our best minds and our brightest people are saying, oh, well, yes, I believe in the gospel, but I would never defend it. Ooh, gross. That would be so gross. I could never do something so nasty and inappropriate as to defend my beliefs. I am just not of that camp. And I think one of the ways to see this is the good, the true, and the beautiful. So this is Aristotelian. This goes way back to Aristotle. And this is a very ancient idea, and I'm not claiming it for myself, but I only discovered it when I was in my 20s. And when I discovered it, I was like, oh my gosh, this adds like layers to my understanding about belief. And one of the first things I realized is when, I said a minute ago, we talk about testimony as though it's just knowledge. Imagine if you could take testimony and add to that knowledge zeal. What does that look like? Now we're talking about knowledge paired with zeal, or what I like to call together conviction. Actually, that's exactly what we want to have. And I would argue that we actually need more conviction and not just static knowledge. I said earlier that there's good evidence, and that there is in psychology, that if you just pour knowledge on people, they don't become better people because it's only an ingredient. But if you have knowledge plus accountability plus a system of beliefs that kind of surround you, one of my favorites is actually roles changing. So when you get married, you're actually very likely to become a better person because you want them to stay with you. And like marriage is that changing of like there's an accountability structure, they'll hold you accountable, but there's also just this desire to do well for your spouse because you care about them and you want to be a good partner for them. That's the kind of thing that actually makes people a better person. This is like the deep moral psychology literature, and I am fascinated by it. I guess what I'm saying is for Latter-day Saints to bear testimony and to become good advocates for the faith and to be missionaries, they need to focus on not just the true, but also the good and the beautiful, but also to become the disciples that they are intended to become, to fill the measure of their creation, to become more like the Savior. They need to deepen that from just knowledge, which I worship at the altar of the truth, right? I am a professor, but also I follow the man who said that he is the truth, the way, the truth, and the life. Like I believe in this really deeply. So apologetics is typically defined as the rational defense of the faith. I do not mind a rational defense of the faith. I think it's a wonderful thing. Again, I think part of the reason why I've started to become a little bit more leery of this is simply because I think that so Jeff Thane is a good friend of mine. We watch sci-fi together. He's also a professor of psychology up here. And he introduced me, I think, perhaps most directly to Jonathan Haidt's theory of the elephant and the rider. This is what we call moral intuitions, and it's moral foundations, and it's, how do I say this? This is not something that just professors need to know. This is something that they should be studying in 11th grade, right? Before you leave high school, this is as important as basic economics and statistics. You just need to know this. This is a social science. And basically what he says is people argue, but the argumentation is all what is it? It's all after the fact, right? All of the stuff that matters is the emotion that we have. And so the example he gives is the elephant. The elephant is big, it's strong, it's powerful. And the elephant is going to win in a fight between the elephant and the rider. And the key here is when we argue with people in real life, we're arguing about the justifications after the fact. It's not about those at all. Right? How many of us have won a Facebook debate? How many people have said, I bow to your superior logic? Like, this is not a thing that ever happens. And this is a crucial idea because the rational defense of the faith is great, but it mostly serves to protect my own beliefs. It mostly feels like a justification for how I believe. And when you look at a lot of apologetics, unfortunately, that is increasingly what it becomes. That is not a game I am interested in playing. I have my own beliefs. I am very comfortable with those beliefs. I don't need to defend them to anybody else for my own sake. And some of the branches of apologetics very quickly become, and very obviously, I want to make it acceptable for me to believe the way that I do. I'm going to defend my beliefs, but I'm mostly doing it so that I don't need to suffer any loss in reputation, right? And so I see, for example, Christians who will make these very weird scientific appeals to how reasonable their faith is. And they'll cite some evidence of Noah's flood or of some hard thing in the scriptures. And listen, I get it. Like I also want my faith to look rational. I don't want to suffer reputational loss from scientists. But I have a much more radical proposition, and that is we literally believe that a man came back from the dead. You should probably let all of that go now, right? You believe in something fundamentally radical. And by the way, we could lean into that instead. And I find it to be incredibly freeing to say, I believe in crazy things. Here's the fun thing. So does everybody else. I just own it, right? I think fundamentally the reality of life is that we don't have enough light and knowledge to understand everything. I'm a scientist. I'm an evidence-based guy. This is how my whole worldview is, right? My whole class that I teach is that we need to know what is true and then live up to it. Here's the thing. I also think it's really important to recognize that there are some things that we don't know, and that is the space in which our agency actually becomes important. That if everything was published in a scientific journal article, then it would just be a matter of dotting our I's and crossing our T's. This is much more interesting to me because we actually have some obligations to act for ourselves when there is, we see through a glass darkly. One other thing that I wanted to mention really quick is the shift from rational to rational plus, right? Rational and emotional and all of these things also allows us, so getting back to the contention point, I find a lot of holiness in Carl Sagan. He probably wouldn't like that I said that, and he's passed now, so that I'm not trying to rib him while he's not here to defend himself. Carl Sagan was a very prominent scientist, and I mean that both in the terms of a traditional scientist. He wore a lab coat and he preached science, But scientism, I think, to the extent that it exists, I think he was one of the high priests of scientism, right? That we need to be rationalists. We only need to do what the data say. We should not live in illusions. God is not real. When I watch Carl Sagan, though, there's a conviction to his beliefs that I find noble and ennobling, even though he is not in my faith. One of the beauties of shifting from rational defense of the faith to a deeper, more complex defense of the faith, emotional and lived and discipleship and changing my beliefs and repentance, is that all of a sudden I see my evangelical friends not as consistent opponents, but also as consistent allies. And by the way, it's very funny when they don't view me that way, which happens all the time. And I just don't care because I still, listen, if you believe in Jesus, we got something real big going for us, right? We believe that a man came back from the dead. That's plenty of common ground. You believe that traditional marriage is a really good setting for kids to grow up. That is one of the most bulletproof laws of sociology and of social science. And yet it is so unpopular that you don't say it in polite company today, right? Because it sounds like it's judgmental. My evangelical friends are willing to say both of those things, that they believe in Jesus and that traditional marriage is really good for kids. We've got a lot that we can be friends on. And one of the biggest skills, I think, in defending what you believe in a way that doesn't become contentious is simply finding allies and saying, yeah, my Catholic friends are awesome. I love their tradition. I love their ritual. I love the esoteric mysticism of high mass at the Vatican. Like, it is a beautiful thing. I genuinely feel holy envy. And then somebody says, oh, well, it sounds like you agree with them on everything. I say, well, of course I don't. And they don't agree with me on everything. That's ridiculous. But when you all of a sudden start seeing allies coming out of the woodwork, you don't feel so alone in the world. You say, it's okay to believe in the things that I believe. And maybe there is some common ground that we can build here. I already talked about this. This is actually the video of me. I love that you can see this. I found this the other day. This is my interview from when I got interviewed at BYU-Idaho. It was during COVID. And so I had to do a recording for my teaching interview. Everybody has to teach. And so I found this, I watched, and I was like, man, I can't believe I got in. But it was really fun to go back and read it. And the auto-generated caption spelled my last name wrong. And so that was a little bit funny. But this is the slide about my fear of, I'm coming to BYU-Idaho. What if they ask me a really deep linguistic question? And I figured out it's really easy. I just ask Brother Schmidt. Brent Schmidt is a friend of mine. And when it comes to real heavy, classic stuff, I'm like, hey, Brent, what you got? And he's always got a great answer for me. I can rely on my friends. The thing that I think is really important is that I have a voice and I have convictions, and I need to share them on the 2 or 3 things that I know for myself, that I've earned the right to speak to. And as it turns out, here's the crazy part about defending what you believe. When you stand up for what you believe, you've got like 2 or 3 pillars to start with. And then all of a sudden, when you defend that thing, it becomes reinforced now where you have 5 or 6 pillars. And you're like, okay, I can't answer every question. I don't know what to do about esoteric, linguistic, ancient issue X, but I have 6 things that I feel like I need to speak on. In fact, one of the ways that I've articulated this in the past is stop thinking about your testimony as the things you know, and start thinking about your testimony in terms of the things that you know so well and that you've paid a price to know, that if you didn't stand up and speak, that you would be held accountable before God someday. And it changes everything about how you stand up at the pulpit on Testimony Week and how you bear witness to your friends and everything else. I think it is an incredibly powerful thing. And again, if I'm sitting with my evangelical friends, I have an absolute conviction of Joseph Smith. That's probably not where I'm going to start. I'm going to start with giving your life to a higher purpose is going to yield incredible benefits and dividends. And all of us agree on this. And this is a beautiful thing. The higher purpose that I am giving my life to is a man from Nazareth who is a carpenter. That is, and I'm not trying to play a game. I'm not trying to mislead them. I recognize that our differences are vast and those differences are real. But it just seems to me a much more obvious starting place. All right, so I'm gonna play a little game. You've been here on my presentation, but I'm still gonna get a little audience participation. So pretend you don't remember this.
All right.
Really quickly. We'll just go through a few of these. So this is a real one that I give in my ed psych class. It makes a lot of people mad. So in class when I do this, I have people walk to the left or to the right side of the classroom. And they have to decide. And the fun part is most of them, it's just their elephant talking. They don't know the answer because they haven't done the research. So there's very little to be rational about. So proposition A, there are special lenses called Irlen lenses that have shown significant benefits to students with dyslexia, or proposition B, special lenses called Irlen lenses have shown zero benefits to students with dyslexia. What did you say when I actually did this in the class? If you were there, and if you weren't there, that's okay. Then it's even better. Then you can just tell me right now. If you had to guess, would you say A or B?
If I remember correctly, I think I said A.
Okay, so he said A, and I'm going to own this up front. This is actually a trick question. It is neither A nor B. There is one benefit. There's only one benefit, but it has been scientifically proven. The one benefit is that it makes your child look a little bit more like Bono. I love the Irlen lenses one because everybody gets mad when I say this. And frankly, some of them have actually worn Irlen lenses to be better readers. And I'm like, that's awesome. That's fine. And some people have said, no, I know it works and I have evidence. Okay, fine. I didn't say that it doesn't work. I said there's no scientific evidence that it works. And if it works for you, fine. Frankly, I don't care if it's a placebo. Maybe it's putting it on your face that feels a little bit like Dumbo's magic feather. Listen, placebo effects aren't fake. They're very real. They just work because you believe in them. So wear them. I don't mind. But what I'm trying to emphasize here is that there is there's zero evidence, and they have been tested quite significantly. There doesn't seem to be any evidence that these Irlen lenses work. Now, I do want to say, I think some people are being taken in. Some people are being swindled. And I'm not a fan of grifters, right? If you're going to provide something, then it better be for benefit. Having said that, that's this one. We'll just do a couple more. We won't do a lot of these. Do you think punching pillows make students more angry? That's A. Or do you think it is a cathartic release and people calm down once they punch a pillow?
Proposition B.
Yeah, so as it turns out, the catharsis theory is not true. There is zero evidence that that is the case. And this makes people really mad. Because they like punching pillows and it just seems like such an obvious thing. At least I'm not punching a face. Yeah, what you're actually doing is you're training kids to punch things when they're mad, which is not a good thing. Actually, as it turns out, one of the best things you can do is journal when you're mad because A, you just get tired really fast and you're like, this isn't worth it. And like, it's work, right? Punching a pillow is fun. After writing for about 10 minutes, you're sick of it and you don't want to write anymore. And so you just kind of force yourself to stop being mad. Journaling is way more effective. Let's do the next one. Let's see. So I did my first two here on purpose. And the reason I did them is because these are two areas I love creating. I love coming up with neuromyths, things that people believe that are not true. The reason I raise this is because one of the best things that we can do in terms of cultural apologetics is just look and see where do the data actually agree with us. And so I can give you 100 examples of these. I won't do all of them, but I can do a couple. Do you think religious people are less happy on average because they have to conform to religious expectations? Or do you think religious people are way happier? And we're talking like overwhelmingly. If you had to guess, which one would you say is probably true?
Well, I've done some research on this, but I will suspend my research. I will just say for the sake of this discussion, let's just say I want to say proposition B, that they're overwhelmingly happier than their non-religious peers.
You would be correct. As it turns out, religious people in general are in fact, it's funny. I heard somebody describing this, and somebody said, yeah, we know that religious people are happier than everybody else. And a different scientist rolled their eyes and said, yes, we all know that. It's a law in social sciences. Why are you bringing it up? Like, we all know that that's a thing. That doesn't mean anything. It's just an assumption that we make at this point. And the other scientist responded with, okay, but like, just because it's so consistent doesn't mean it's not interesting, right? The fact that you've seen it 100 times is not to say that it isn't groundbreaking. I heard a different podcast where they were talking about this, and they said, well, yeah, but when you account for the pieces of religious belief, like the fact that they get married, they stay married, they have more kids, they don't drink alcohol, they behave better, they're better spouses, and they have more meaning because of theology and theological beliefs in their life during suffering, then most of those things go away and they're a lot, then they're basically equal to all of their peers. And the longer the list went, as this podcaster was explaining it, the more I was laughing, where it's like, oh yeah, it's just those like 18 things. And once we package them all together, but here's the thing, we package them into something called religious belief. That's why it works. I am shocked, and I say this genuinely, I am shocked that there are not more religious atheists. And what I mean by this is, and I have a couple of friends who do this, they're like, I don't believe in the doctrine, but I know it's good for my family, it's good for me, so I'm going to attend church. I'm just going to tell the bishop, hey, I don't believe in it at all, but I'm still going to attend because I believe it's good for me and I want to have a community and service. I think that should be a trend. This is the thing that should be happening. And by the way, I think it would be great for everybody, but it would especially be great for me because I can try to convince them. I'm like, hey, what if it's all true, right? And that'd be really great. But if it's not, a lot of atheists have now kind of jumped on the bandwagon of it's not real, it's not true. It's just a way to pass along a packet of beliefs and ideas and community that are really beneficial. Great. So if that's the case, why don't we tell that to people and encourage them to keep coming even if it's not real and true? That's what an atheist should be doing because we know that they're all beneficial, but we don't do that. We just throw our hands up and go, it's all fake, so I'm going to drink my booze, right? And I think that's just a really dumb reason to be an atheist. Like, listen, I don't get that's I think the thing that I liked about Carl Sagan is that it wasn't licentious atheism. It was a devoted atheism. And because of this, there are expectations on my moral character. And that's why I think of him as in my group, even though we would have disagreed on all of the things, because he actually believed that what he knew meant that he had to act in accordance with the light that he had received, if I can use that religious terminology. This is a favorite one of mine. Latter-day Saints are more perfectionistic than others. This derives from both theology and culture. The press to feel perfect as measured by others in the community, and the need to live up to high standards, and even perfection as a matter of church doctrine, or religiosity is tied to better mental health, especially when freely chosen. Latter-day Saints often strive to improve, but report less toxic perfectionism than others, likely due to a grace-centered theology. Those who leave the church, however, often experience more toxic perfectionism, which may contribute to their decision. So if you had to guess which one this is, actually, let me put it this way. What do you think the narrative about Latter-day Saints is in the world? And then I'll ask you for your opinion on these two things.
Yeah, well, I think for Proposition A, for a lot of Latter-day Saints do tend to experience, at least from what I've seen, it seems to be the case that a lot of Latter-day Saints have more perfectionistic, partially because the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is a high-demand religion and has been classified as a high-demand religion. So I would venture to say that probably that partially is, I say that is definitely true, that Latter-day Saints do deal with that more, but with Proposition B, that definitely can contribute to people leaving the church, not necessarily because they just want to sin, but it's more just like some of their beliefs or understandings or assumptions of what's expected of them may get in the way of that a little bit and may contribute to their decision to leave religion or to leave, and that oftentimes can contribute to their decision.
Yes. So you've done a very nice job. Justin Dyer is the one who actually did the research on this, and he's at BYU. He's one of the, I think he's the publisher now of the RSC, or BYU Studies it might be, one of the main publications at BYU, and they did a whole series on this, like a whole volume, I think is what it's called. An episode is what I was thinking of, and that's not the right word. And the way that the place that it came from was somebody stood up and said, well, we all know that Latter-day Saints are more perfectionistic, so here are some things you can do to help with perfectionism at BYU. And in his mind, he's going, we all know? Do we all know? Are you sure we all know that? And so he decided to look at it. And he did a bunch of looking, and what he found was almost the exact opposite, that Latter-day Saints are not more perfectionistic than others. And I will say two things. First, I think that high demand for some of us. So the other day, a student told me this, and I told her, I was like, yeah, I got to cut some readings from the class. It's too hard. People are complaining. She looks at me and she put her hand on my shoulder and said, don't you dare. This is the first class that has finally felt like I had to work for it. And that's what makes it fun. Please do not remove the rigor from this class. It brings me meaning. It's the class I look forward to. Now, I did end up killing some of the stuff in the class for a good reason. But it was breathtaking to me to realize that rigor and expectation create a sense of purpose and meaning and belonging and all of those things. I like to often ask my students, think of the last time that you really belonged. And many of them, I mean, like an overwhelming majority, it will go back to a sports team or a music group. Something where there was a high level of expectation. This is really interesting to me, and I wish I had time to study it, but I don't. I would love to see how high expectations create a sense of belonging. And I just really believe this. To answer your question, Justin Dyer goes out and he finds, turns out when you build your whole theology around Jesus and being forgiven, that it helps people more than it hurts them. on perfectionism. Now, to your point, it is the case, and I don't think that this is a rah-rah Latter-day Saints kind of a finding. It is the case that maybe part of the reason why we are losing people occasionally is because we are doing a good job of preaching a set of to-do list items instead of preaching the restored gospel of Jesus. And that repentance is real and it's not a backup plan. That all of us can become something better than we are. And there's something about that that is incredibly meaningful to me. So I won't go through all of these. I have a bunch of them. They're all nice and spicy like this. And what I tried to do was show off to people that there are a lot of beliefs that we have that we're embarrassed about. But when you really get down and look at it, you go, why am I embarrassed by this? This is actually a very true, meaningful belief that is worth my time, and that I don't need to be embarrassed about because the data is actually on my side. I've got a bunch of other slides, and maybe we can do an episode 2 at some point. I'll just point out really quick, there are a couple of links in here about people that are really nailing this. One is the Keller Center. So I think it was Pastor Keller passed away maybe a year or two ago. I loved listening to him. I felt the spirit when he talked. And it was lovely. There's also the St. John Paul II National Shrine, where they have a center on cultural apologetics. And it seems to be that they are doing exactly the kind of work I described. I don't know them super well, so maybe I'm misunderstanding that, but I think that's useful. And then, of course, I had to throw my buddy Jeff Thane under the bus with a picture of him breaking the honor code with a beard. But I love that Brother Thane. He has personally taught me so much about how much we rely upon these other things like culture and like intuitions and things like that. Let me end on this thought, because I can do just a couple of these really quick. Why culture? And how can we raise a rising generation? I think about my 13-year-old. I think about my kids. Why is this important to me? And the answer is because right now we are going through a period where the culture is so potent that if you're not careful, your kids will grow up thinking that the best thing they can do is be themselves. And I say that jokingly, but not actually at all. I found it really provocative that a couple conferences ago, Frank Sinatra came up 3 times in 3 different, it was 3 or 2, it was at least 2 different times in different talks by apostles nonetheless, where they kind of said, I did it my way, maybe not the best way to go about life. And I love showing people the upside and the downside to group synchrony. We have a whole unit on it in this class where doing things, marching in line actually is a dopamine release. It feels like you're good and you're capable. And so it's a really wonderful thing. But one of the things that I try to say is we've now turned the opposite. So both of these are a danger, right? If you're not careful, you can very quickly go down the line of, I will do whatever it takes to fit in with the crowd. You can also do whatever it takes to be an individual. I love Witt in Hoyd in the Stormlight Archive. He has a whole pitch about how hard it is to be creative in an infinite universe of souls, where anything creative is really actually quite difficult because it's all been done before. And there's a whole monologue about it. What I try and tell my students is, no matter what you do, you're not going to be that creative. And no matter what you do, you're going to have a tribe. So pick the tribe really deliberately and then do what they do. But make sure that you're always willing to back away if you need to. And I think that's a good description of some of what we are looking to do. We'll skip that one really quickly. I love this. This is by Mormoner. They have the best memes on the internet. This one is, Church reiterates position on making Brandon Sanderson your whole personality. I guffawed when I heard this one because the picture of me that's up at the Hinckley building where my office is me pretending to be a Mistborn, and I'm levitating some coins. And so this is a really fun one. At the bottom, I also love this. It says, the church also reiterates its long-going stance on watching movies other than The Princess Bride, encouraging members to please stop quoting it all the time. Seriously, we've seen it. Man, you're 36 years old. Please stop saying marriage. And it was just very funny, right? Like, we have a culture too. And that doesn't mean that our culture is perfect. I know that it isn't. Although I will say, green Jell-O now flows in my veins. I'm a proud Utahn. If you want to say something mean about Utah, you better say it to somebody else. I tend to find that a lot of people who make fun of Utah are actually just trying to get in a dig at the church without saying something unkind. So culture matters. Our kids are growing up in a culture. Why does all of this matter? I love this from, I steal this from my class. Well, I'm not being an individual all on my own. You should watch the full clip. It's about wearing the jacket over the school uniform. And it is not long lived because the parents find out what they're trying to do. And then the whole group of them say, well, I'm not going to wear a jacket then. I can't go and be an individual all by myself, right? Everybody needs a tribe is the idea. Here's the reason why I believe that this is important. If you do nothing, then your kids are going to absorb the culture in which they are raised. And right now it is very focused on expressive individualism. I think C.S. Lewis said it really well. One of the best things we can do on this is every age has its own outlook. It is especially good at seeing certain truths and especially liable to make certain mistakes. We all therefore need the books that will correct the characteristic mistakes of our own period. And that means the old books. I think there's something really beautiful about being an old, grumpy, 90-year-old Republican who asks, what have we got right? And the answer is, I think we do have a few things in the gospel. In fact, more than a few. I am incredibly grateful for my life in the gospel and the way that it has transformed me, my belief in Jesus, but also my belief that I can become something more than I am today, that repentance is real and it's not just for the sinners, it's for all the saints. Reading the old books, telling the old stories has made me a better man. And so when I talk about cultural apologetics, I hope that it's for the online debates. I hope it's for arguing on social media. I also hope that we recognize that it is required if we're going to raise the next generation with some level of conviction about their beliefs. I'll just end on this one. This is one of my current favorites. It's a little bit spicy. I don't think there's anything wrong with being authentic. I don't think there's anything wrong with being your true self. In fact, for a 13-year-old, it's actually really important to decide who are you and what do you have to offer the world. But I will warn that Disney Channel movies that are intended for teenagers can become really destructive when 40-year-olds are quoting them. When we begin to worship at the altar, not of the Lord God of Israel, but instead of the Lord God of the authentic self and expressive individualism, that's the wrong altar to worship at. And it doesn't pay good rewards. It doesn't pay good rewards to worship at the altar of politics. It doesn't pay good rewards to worship at the altar of what builds my reputation among my community. I think some people, not all, some people who leave the church are leaving a set of cultural practices and beliefs that they hadn't felt the music, right? And that's a different kind of a thing. And to be clear, some people had very much felt the music, and that's a different thing. So I'm not trying to oversimplify there. I think one of the reasons why we need to have cultural apologetics is so that we know and understand what our kids are being raised in, and so that they can be aware there is so much good in our culture. There is also some bad. And that if they're going to survive as disciples, they need to know about both parts. So that's a shortened version of my presentation. So I'll let you respond now with any questions that you might have.
Well, and I think one of the things too, just to note real quick about cultural apologetics or worldview, specifically this authentic self, this expressive individualistic worldview, where oftentimes I know Jeffrey Thane at a fair presentation, a fair presentation that he gave, and one of the things that he talked about is the different kind of gospels, and not necessarily the synoptic gospels in the New Testament, but he's talking more worldview type of gospels. And so one of these is the prosperity gospel, where people, it's kind of like when you hear talks in general conference where someone's saying, well, pay your tithing and the Lord will give you money, basically, or you'll be able to pay your rent this month or something like that, where just that isn't necessarily false, but oftentimes that can ingrain in Latter-day Saints or other believers that if I give stuff to God, if I give this to God, God's going to give me something tenfold back. And that creates this idea of prosperity, and kind of like what you were saying, this idea of sometimes we leave the cultural aspects of it rather than the actual aspects of it. Another worldview type of gospel that Jeffrey Thane talks about is the individualistic gospel, where it's oftentimes this very expressive individualistic, that ultimately it is what the self is what matters. It is not submitting my life to God. I may say I'm submitting my life to God, but not at the expense that it is harming my emotional well-being or my individual self. And that can also cause issues when people end up leaving the church or religion. We see that very prevalent nowadays in the United States. I'd say in the world, but especially in the United States, with certain issues. For example, women in the priesthood issues, or women in leadership issues, LGBTQ issues. People, or specifically people that may be of a different race, that learn stuff about our history, and it's more about these social, like this individualistic worldview versus this other worldview. And then Jeffrey Thane talks about how the most important worldview that we have, that a lot of people may not, they may unconsciously not have, is the redemptive gospel worldview, where that is, we are broken and fallen creatures. We need Jesus. We are submitting our life, and consecrating ourselves to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints for the building up of the kingdom of Zion, because it is God's kingdom. Now, understanding the why, what each of these worldviews are, or these different gospels are, I would say is very, very important if we're going to just be able to thrive. President Nelson talks about how you're going to need personal revelation, but I'd also add, you need to know where you are, what kind of worldview that you have, where you typically align, because that's going to be a strong indicator of how you're going to be able to grapple with certain topics, certain issues, and how you're also going to be able to defend the faith. Apologetics is something I think that's very important, but there is such a thing as bad apologetics, and that's when it's tainted with politics, when it's tainted with a specific worldview that we have. There are some apologists, when I was on my mission a bit of years ago, that I remember that I looked up to, and because they provided good arguments. But then I discovered more and more about them after the fact, and I realized, wow, this is very surface level. There's a lot of things here that are inhibiting these people from really providing the best arguments, or really being able to put the forefront of their life into the gospel. And it's because of these other worldviews or cultures that they have. They may not necessarily left, but they're tainted. Their view seems to be a little bit tainted because of this specific viewpoint. So that was kind of a lot, but I think that goes really in hand of just what you're saying about why cultural apologetics are important, and just why this topic is so important to understand. And for those of you listening, I'll be sure to link a lot of what we talked about today in the description below too, and also Jeffrey Thane's worldview presentation that he gave at Fair, because that's something that's very important. But one of the questions, though, that I do have about just kind of this whole discussion would probably be that, first, I guess my first question would be, Latter-day Saints oftentimes may not understand why cultural apologetics are important, or why this specific worldview is important. So I guess the first question I have would be, for Latter-day Saints, how can they even begin to understand this topic of just cultural apologetics, and where they align, and how they can shift their life a little bit to be more in line with the gospel, what the culture of the gospel actually should be. So my first question would be, how do Latter-day Saints get to that point? Because I think a lot of them, they want to get to that point, but they're like, okay, these other things are tainted. How do I ensure I have this correct viewpoint of cultural, and engage in cultural apologetics that's the right way to go about it?
Well, let me start with the fact that you were very charming. You said, "I know that was a lot. I'm sorry for talking for 3 minutes straight." And in my head, I'm going, I think I went for 22 without even letting a word in edgewise. So I think you were doing just fine. I'll answer that in a couple of ways. The first one is, let me go back to something that you said a minute ago, and that is, I have a friend, and I was talking with her, and I said something a little bit vulnerable. I make lots of silly jokes. The reason I make silly jokes is actually to distract from the fact that I think everything is serious all the time. And I articulated to her, and this was meaningful to both of us. I said, I just feel like life is high stakes. Like, there are things that I can just enjoy, but most of the time, I just want to make a difference. I want to be a good person. I want to have a meaningful life. And we've talked about that a few times. Life is high stakes. So then here's my question. If life is high stakes, and not everybody agrees with me, some people believe in the unexamined life, right? Just enjoy life and skate on by. But my view has always been that I want to make my life meaningful. And by the way, there's very good psychology evidence that says that we are primed for this, that we are wired for this, that we are intended to give our life to something. I would like to give my life to something meaningful. I would like to give my life. And this is where I really like Carl Sagan. This is where I like my Catholic friends and my Jewish friends. The idea of devoting your life to a higher purpose is in its own right a facet of my religion. And it makes it really easy for me to see the other people. So to my Latter-day Saint friends, I would ask, do you think that you are in a position where you can give your life to something higher than who you are? The second thing I would ask is, I love what President Holland said. I was on my mission and I needed to hear this. He said, one of the most universally disobeyed commandments is, and I was like, oh no, I'm already sinning. What can I do? I got to do it better. I got to repent. And he said, it's to lift up your heart and rejoice. You're not doing it. You need to do it right now. I don't think that our religion is meant to be a religion of moping and complaining and whining. I actually think that our religion is meant to be optimistic and joyous and filled with rejoicing. And so when I say dance to the music, I really mean not only that you get into it and you know you're going to look a little bit like a goober, but you have to do it anyway. I mean that it is joyous and joyful. And so, hey, here's a way to start. How about you just love living the way that you're living? How about, I'll give you another example. I have a friend who lives in a very nuanced faith. They are going through some hard stuff. They have some challenges with their faith. And I recognize that. And I have worked with them. And they have said, I am always so grateful that you are willing to let me speak up without judging me. And I said, no problem. As long as you also are okay with not judging me for living the way that I live. And it was super funny because she was like, well, of course, why would you? And I said, I am shocked by how many people I talk to who, when I make a really joyful post about my beliefs, will say, oh, well, that was not good. You shouldn't do that. That's not socially appropriate. And I said, I don't care if it's socially appropriate. That's not what this is about. This is who I am. If my nuanced friend gets to live authentically, don't I get to as well? I think Jesus is the bee's knees. I think repentance is awesome, right? Like this brings joy to my soul. And like, I don't think there's anything wrong. If other people are going to use the term living authentically, then by golly, I better be able to use it too. And I think that's important. So that's what I would say is, if the gospel, one of our kids, we told them this the other day, there are times when this child of ours, we have 4 kids, is doing great and in a happy mood, and he forgets to tell his face. And so the other day we gave him the advice. I said, hey, are you happy right now? He said, yeah. I said, can you tell your face that? And he was like, what are you talking about? It was kind of a funny thing to say, but I was trying to tell him, I was like, I think you're a happy kid, but people don't know because you just have a really intense look all the time. And once I told him, he just started smiling more, and it was good. It was great. I think Latter-day Saints are allowed to act like this is a gospel of joy. And I think that's what I would say.
Sweet. Well, Ben, thank you so much for coming on today. This has been a great discussion. And for those of you that are listening, we'll definitely be sure to link the discussions, the resources that Ben talked about and mentioned and shared below for all of you if you want to look further into this discussion that we've had. But everyone, this has been Sword and Spirit. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you all next week. Take care, everyone.